Hello, everyone. Welcome to another OBI webinar. My name is Katerina Mota, and I'm the founder and director of the Open Building Institute. And today we are going to talk about how to use the OBI library in Sweet Home 3D. I hope you had an opportunity to install Sweet Home 3D because it might take a little bit to download, and we're going to be using it a lot. So most of this webinar is going to I'm going to be showing you how to manipulate objects in the application. But before we get into that, I'm going to switch to screen mode because I want to just talk about something really briefly. Just 1 second. And here we are. Let's see, view, present. Okay, so before we get into that, I just wanted to show you a little bit of okay, I'm not getting the full screen here. Talk a little bit about what we mean by modularity. So the Open Building Institute does modular construction. Normally, when you hear that expression, most people think either mobile homes or exactly what I'm showing here in this image, in which a house is prefabricated at the factory and then transported in so-called modules and assembled in place. Now, this wall here is what it's typically called the module. It's an entire wall or an entire section of a roof or an entire section of a floor, right? Now, when we say modules, we actually mean something quite different. We mean this image that you see here on the right. And this is a much smaller unit. It's almost like a Lego. Right? You can combine this with a wall module, with a door module, etc., etc., instead of having an entire wall is already been pre-designed and fabricated. So what is our process for designing both the modules and with the modules? So here's a very brief overview of that. And why can't I get full screen? Well, I don't understand. Anyway, it's going to be brief. So basically, we start by designing a part in 3D. And I often, most of the time, I do that in Sweet Home 3D. Sometimes I use other applications depending on the needs. Then that part becomes a library of parts. So I have several parts. I collect them and gather them into a library, which is itself a single file that contains many different parts. Then I use this library of parts to design a module. And this is one module, and I design several modules. Then I gather all of those modules again into a library, which again, it's one single file that contains several different modules. And then I use that library to design a building. Now, one of the things that I found has been most confusing for people is that as part of this library, or as part of the files that we make available online, there are many different formats. And in each format represents a different stage of the design. And that can get really confusing, especially because each one of those files is treated differently and used differently. So hopefully I will be able to clarify that a little bit and explain why we have so many different files and when do you need each one of them. So now I'm going to switch here, hopefully, to Sweet Home 3D. So this is what the application looks like when you first open it. So hopefully you downloaded and installed it, and this is what it looks like. We have 4 panes here. This pane right here is the main one. This is your canvas. This is where you're going to be drawing your house or your module, whatever it is that you're drawing, right? So in this pane right here is the library, let's call it that. Right? So it contains the objects that you're going to use to design whatever it is that you're designing. Now, Sweet Home 3D, I forgot to mention, let's just do a little bit. It's an open source software for interior design. So the application was not created to design houses, but we like it so much that we realized that the functionality was so flexible that we decided to adopt it as one of the main platforms for OBI, though we do definitely want to expand to Blender and FreeCAD as well. So I'm going to walk you a little bit through how Sweet Home 3D works by itself before we even get into how to use it for OBI. So basically, because it's an interior design application, most of the objects you have on this library pane are pieces of furniture. Right? Because that's what you do in interior design. So the way this works is you basically select one of these. I'm just selecting some random armchair. I'm dragging it onto my canvas, onto my plan. As soon as I drag it onto here, it shows up on this other pane. And this is the 3D view pane. And I'm just manipulating it with my mouse. That's it, right? So anything that I drag onto here, here's another chair, shows up here. But it doesn't just show up here, it shows up on this pane as well. So this fourth pane on the bottom left basically contains all the objects that you are using on your plane. It's like a list. If you're a Photoshop or Illustrator user, you may be familiar with this system, right? Where you have layers or different objects. So everything that I put here shows up here as well. This is all going to be very useful. Okay, so this is just a little intro. Now, the first thing we want to do is configure this in a way that is more practical for designing houses. And what I would like to suggest is that you start by, hold on one second, by opening the preferences. This is the panel, the preferences panel. And one of the first things I did was I switched my units, my measuring units to inches. And the reason for that is because the OBI modules and library is designed using this system, and it's just going to be easier if your application is set up to handle it. The next thing I do is I switch from a searchable list to a category folders view for the furniture catalog or the library. And you'll see later why that is important or helpful. I leave magnetism, rules, and grid on. Those are all very useful. And I don't make any other changes, and I just say OK. So now, basically, what I see here is I no longer see my library as icons, but I see it as a series of folders. And each one of these folders is going to contain a certain number of objects. For example, like this one that says bathroom, bedroom, characters. All of these come default with Sweet Home 3D, right? So these are the ones that come with the application. Later on, we're going to add our own, namely the OBI library and furniture, etc. So, but now let's look a little bit more into the basics. Now, say I remember I dragged this armchair onto my plan, but now I'm not quite happy with the way it looks or whatever. You know, I need to make some changes to it. So there are a few ways to do that. So one is by direct manipulation. So you see that when I highlight it, it shows, let me make this a little bit bigger so you can see better. Okay, I'm going to just adjust my panes here. Okay, so it shows 4 icons each in each corner. Okay, so this one, this little curved arrow here is the rotation. So I can rotate this chair around like so. Okay, this one here will make it will determine the elevation, like where on my plan. Say I want this chair way up here for some reason, right? So I'm using this to control the elevation. This one controls the size. So I'm scaling my chair. I can scale it proportionally or not, okay? And this one determines the height. Okay, so here we're scaling it on the X and Y axis, and here we're scaling it on the Z axis. Now, speaking of axis, so another thing that you may have noticed on your plan is that you have this little compass, and this tells you that it's north. This is actually going to be really useful when you're working with buildings because you do want to know the location of each one of your elements, so that's quite useful. All right, so that's one way of manipulating objects. Now, this is not very precise. If you're designing a house, you need a certain level of precision that the direct manipulation does not offer. So my preferred method for manipulating an object is double-clicking on it, which opens this panel right here. So I'm going to try and let me see if I can align this panel right here. So first thing, the name. You can change the name of this object, and I can just call it chair, for example. Right, you can select to display the name on the plan or not. I usually don't do it. Then another very important section is size. So you saw how I manipulated, I changed the size of the chair, but that wasn't like, say I need it to be exactly 30 inches wide. So wide refers to the X, to this axis right here. I want it to be 20 inches deep, and depth represents this one, this axis right here, the Y. And I want it to be 17 inches high, and that represents the Z, which I can't show you here because I don't have a third dimension. So now if I say, okay, here are the proportions I assigned to this object. Okay, now there's more we can do on this panel. We can change the shininess to matte or shiny. I rarely use this. We can also change the color and texture. For example, my chair actually here, you can see has a couple colors. There's black and there's gray. If I go to color and I'm going to just select a random color, yellow, for example, and I do okay, the entire chair is yellow now. You can see that the feet are yellow, the upholstery is yellow, everything is yellow. So maybe I didn't really want to do that. Okay, so that's what, okay. Another thing we could do, okay, I could switch to unchanged here. So we go back to our original object. And then I'm not really happy with the color, so I'm going to try a texture. So I select texture and I click on this right here. And Sweet Home 3D comes with a library of textures, lots of textures. You can always download additional ones from the website as well, or you can import your own. You can create your own textures. And the Sweet Home 3D website provides a lot of information on that. It's very easy. Okay. Now, say I want to, it's a long list. You can scroll through it, or you can just, what you want. You want wood, right? So I just entered wood here, and now it's only showing me textures that are related to wood. And I'm going to choose poplar. Okay, so I chose poplar. Now my chair has the texture of wood. Now this is not really appropriate for a chair, but you get the gist. Another option, I'm going to again do unchanged, so I'm undoing what I did. Another option is to change each element of the chair's texture or color individually. And to do that, you go click on materials, you click on modify, and here you have the planes that the areas of the object that you're allowed to change. So say I want my material to be yellow, okay, but I want the feet to be black. Okay, so now I have a yellow chair with black feet. So I was able to change each area individually. So that's the first thing. Now, more complicated is the location of where on your plan is this chair. Now, if you're just doing interior design, you probably don't need it to be very precise. You kind of want, I'm going to delete these other ones from here so they're not just creating noise. You can kind of like, yeah, I want it kind of like on this corner. It looks good. But when you're designing modules or houses, you need a much higher level of precision, right? So one way to do that is to use the location parameters to assign it. So remember, all of these numbers are in inches. This is 30 inches, 20, 17, 3. So this is all inches because that's the unit I set for my in my preferences. So here's the thing. Say when I'm starting to design something, I like to start to have the the top left corner of my module on the 0, 0 point of the plan, like right here. You can see 0 here and 0 here. And this is really going to help me moving on to be able to calculate the position of all other objects in relationship to this first one. Okay, so one thing I can do is I can just say, I want this chair on 0.0 of the X, 0.0 of the Y with an elevation of 0 and an angle of 0, right? So that should set it right on the corner, except it doesn't, right? So you can see the 0.0 is here, 0, 0 is here. And the reason is because the registration point, meaning what the software understands has the reference point of the object in Sweet Home 3D is the middle, right? So this is actually situated on the 0, 0 point, but that 0, 0 is in the middle, and I want it to be on this corner. So to do that, what I'm going to do is basically divide the width by 2. So I'm going to set it to 15, divide the height by 2, set it to 20, okay? So now you can see that I have the upper left corner of my object on the 0, 0 point. All right. Now I'm going to switch to another object because it's going to be easier to see. So I'm going to open the miscellaneous folder and look for an object called box. Here we go. And all this is a box. Now, we can barely see the box because it's blending with the background. So I'm going to show you another important part, which is we're going to go into 3D view, and we're going to open modify 3D view, right? So this is basically, again, another collection of settings that allows you to configure how you want your application, or specifically how you want a certain file to look. So I have a box for ground, so I can change the color of the ground to, blue, for example. Can do the same with the sky to black, and this is what I'm going to end up with. But I could also use textures, right? So I like to use blue for both. I just like the way it looks. That's just my thing. That's it. So I'm just choosing blue fibers and doing okay, and this is what I end up with. Okay. Now there's a couple other things important here. So you can see that right now I have aerial view selected, and that is basically a bird's eye view, right? So I can see the object from any angle, kind of like from the outside, but always from the outside. Now I could switch over here to virtual visit. And what the virtual visit does is it creates this little characters here, which you can manipulate, right? Now, if you look at it, where's my box? It's gone. And the reason is because the character is looking away from the box. So I can manipulate this character, turn it around, and well, whoops, I still don't see my box. And the reason is because the eye level is too high. So I got to bring my character down using this manipulator right here. So basically the character has 4 points of manipulation, can move it around in space. And you can also do that on this box right here, or you can, I'm gonna decrease this. You can change the eye level, like right here, up or down. You can change the orientation of the body angle, or you can change the head angle. Means a person, is it looking up or down, right? So this can become really useful once you've designed a house if you want to check details on the interior that the bird's eye view does not allow you to. In general, I tend to work first on aerial view because it's the broader one. And for example, like say you arrive, so say you're at the virtual visit and you have one detail that you want to get a picture of for some reason, or you want to keep an eye on. So you can also go to 3D view and do store point of view. Basically, you can record this point of view, and I'm just going to record it as corner. Call it corner, okay? Now I'm going to switch to, I'm going to move my little guy around, and it's looking at something else. Now I go to 3D view, and I go to point of view corner, and boom, it goes back to where it was. Okay. Now there's other things you can do here. None of them is really quite important for our purposes right now. So I'm just going to leave it alone and switch back to aerial view. Okay, so now first thing we're going to do is once again make sure that the top left corner of our, I'm going to rename this called square, and make sure that the top left corner of my object is on the 0 point, and here we go. Okay, now if I wanted to sit higher, to have a higher elevation, I could also set this. So now look at it, right? It's sitting right there. I click OK, and boom, it goes up. Okay, so this is where you control the elevation, meaning the position. Now the elevation works differently from the other registration points. The registration point for the elevation is the bottom. It's right here. So when I say 10, when I enter a number 10 for the elevation, it means that there are 10 inches between this cube and what is considered the ground in Sweet Home 3D. Okay, so actually, let me just say something that I failed to say in the beginning, which is because this is more of an interactive session, usually we do like a straight-on presentation for 45 minutes and then questions at the end, but I would like to encourage you to pose your questions now, like as we go along, so feel free to interrupt at any moment, okay? All right, okay, so, GIMP or Inkscape. Oh, I'm sorry, Marcin, what was that question? Oh, yeah, I said Illustrator and Photoshop. Yes, I apologize for the proprietary reference. I take it back. Okay.
All right, so now let me just go back here to my little cheat sheet so I know that I'm not missing anything. Okay, so now here's another object. Okay, so now here's the next thing. The next challenge is I'm gonna take this and I'm gonna copy this object, just Control C, Control V, and I have two objects. Now, say I want to align them side by side, and that's one of the biggest challenges that you're going to have when designing a house with a library of modules is how to get them perfectly aligned the way you need them to. So I'm going to change the dimensions of this one a little bit just to make it more challenging. So the first option I have is this one. Remember, we put it right where we want it. It's at the 0, 0 point, right? And actually, I'm going to make an identical one and just give it a different color. I'm going to make it yellow. Okay, so we can tell them apart and you can see them here. They're kind of like they're not aligned. Now, you can do this manually, but it's kind of hard if you need any level of precision. But there's one really cool thing, which is I had the magnetism turned on my preferences, which means when I push this cube against the next one, it kind of like snaps right where this one ends. So we know that it's aligned here, but is it aligned here? I'm not sure. So now I have a few options. First option is I start by selecting the object that is perfectly aligned, the one that I aligned, and then I select the second object, and I go to Furniture, Align Side by Side, and boom, they're perfectly aligned. Another option is, say this object is not exactly the same size, so if I do Align Side by Side, it's kind of, centered, and I want them to be aligned here. So I'm going to do once again, select first the one that you want to use as a reference, then the other one. And I'm going to do align on bottom, and it's aligned here. Okay, so there's many ways to align, and I'm going to use a few different ones depending on the situation, depending on how the objects need to align with each other and what the dimensions of the objects are. Okay, but now say I have a bunch of these cubes, a lot of them, and they're all kind of doing something. And now I want to manipulate all of them at the same time. So I can go here, either you can select them here, or you can select them all here. Okay, so I selected all of them, and I go to Furniture Group. Now I can name my group, right? So I created a group, they're all connected. So when I move them, they move as a group. Okay, but I can do more than that. I can actually change the entire position of the group. I can change the width of the group. So basically, I can manipulate a group of objects. I can change the color of all the elements on the group. I can manipulate a group of objects as if it was one. This is going to be really, really useful later on when you have dozens and dozens of objects in your plan, and you definitely do not want to make changes to each one of them individually. Okay, so these are the basics of Sweet Home 3D. So I'm just deleting everything in here. And now we're going to move on to, let's use the Real House module, says Marcin. Okay, any questions so far? Feel free to interrupt at any moment, okay? Okay, so now let's move on to using our library. So like I said, the first thing we do is create a part, and then a library of parts, and then a module. So I'm going to kind of like do this from the beginning, and we're going to start by designing a module. Now, how do I create parts? First thing is I'm going to use this box. This box is really cool because it's just a geometric shape. Okay, it's a geometric shape that can be made into anything. Now, I am going to design a wall module that uses 2x6 lumber. Okay, so the first thing I need to do is create a piece of 2x6 lumber. And 2x6 lumber is basically a board that measures 1.5 inch by 5.5 inches, and then it's whatever length I want it to be. So I'm going to double click on this, and I'm going to say that the width, and remember the width is this axis right here, of this board is 1.5, that the depth is 96 inches, and that the height is 5.5. Okay, so now see my cube is now starting to look a lot more like a piece of lumber. Okay, there it is. But it still doesn't quite look like a piece of lumber. So I'm going to give it a texture that makes it look more like what I want it to be. And I'm going to, once again, search for wood. And I like to use this one. I like this texture. Okay, so now I have my piece of wood. Now, the next step is to place it on the 0, 0 point, and I am going to do once again by dividing the width by in half, that's 0.75, and dividing the depth by 2, also 48. Okay, so now it's at the 0, 0 point where I want it to be. Now, I am going to design my wall module laying down as if it was laying down on the floor. And I do that for two reasons. One is because I find it easier to work on the X and Y axis. It's just easier to see it on the plan because this plan is two-dimensional. If I build in height, it becomes at one point really hard to see all the parts. And the second one is because wall modules are typically built on the ground. So I'm seeing it and designing it as it's going to be built. So that's really helpful. Okay, so now I have my board here, and I'm going to do is I'm just going to copy and paste a copy of this because I need another stud on this module. And I know that the spacing between studs on my wall modules is 24 inches. Okay, so now I could go here and tell it to go to X24, and here I maintain the 48, right? Except that what Sweet Home 3D is doing here is that it's 24 inches from this point to the middle of this one. But what I actually want for 24-inch on center building is for 24 inches between the center of this one and the center of this one. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to add 3/4 of an inch to this. And now I know that there are 24. Now let's test the theory. Okay, so I'm going to get my measuring tape here, which is this one, this icon right here, create dimensions. I'm going to put it on the center of this one and drag it to the center of this one. And boom, I know I have 24 inches here. So I know that this is what I want to have. And you can keep this on your plan as a reference. I keep them on my modules. Okay, now I need a third stud over here, and again I know that it's going to be on the 48 for the Y, and for the X I know that it's going to be 48 inches minus 3/4, so that's 47.25. And if I measure again from the center of this one to the center of this one, oh no, okay, no, that's correct, because I want the total length of what's going on? Oh, my measurements are probably not in the right place. So let's just ignore this. What I really want for this module is I want my module to be a total of 48 inches. So that's what I should have here. And that's what I have here. Okay, because this is my standard module. So all our modules are typically, most of our modules are 48 inches by 96 inches. So that's my frame. And this one is kind of in the middle. So I am actually going to change this back to 24, so it's in the exact center. Okay. Now I need for this module, I need a top plate and a bottom plate. So I am once again going to get my box, and I'm going to turn it into, I'm going to make sure the width is 48. The height is 1.5, and this one is 5.5. And I'm going to put it at 24, 0.75. And there it is, right there. Okay. So now you can see that it's intersecting the other members. I don't want that, actually. What I do really want is for these members to be 93 inches so that they end up there. So I'm going to just do all of that, 93. And 93. Okay, so now let me just do, so you can understand what I'm doing this. I'm going to copy this one. Okay, I'm going to give it another texture, and I'm going to do pine. It's a nice one, and I'm going to once again copy it. I'm going to drag it over here to the bottom, and see, because the magnetism is, it just snaps onto here. Okay, so I know that it's flush against these, but I don't know if it's centered. So now I have two options. One is to go over here and tell it to go to X24, or
I could start by selecting this one on the left, selecting the one that I want to align, and do furniture align on left. So now it aligned this corner, meaning I know this is all going to be good. Okay, so now if I take my measuring tape again here and I measure from this point to this point, I should get 96 inches, and here it is. So those are the final measurements of my module. Okay, and you can see it right here. Now I like to use different textures for the studs and the top and bottom plates, just because it's easier to see it when you're doing technical design. It's just easier to be able to see where one ends and the next one begins. Now, one thing I didn't do that I should have done, I should have named my boxes. So I'm going to say that this is a 2x6. So when I look at this, I know that all of these are 2x6s. Okay, so that's kind of just a housekeeping thing. Instead of just saying box, which one is a box and what is it? They're all 2x6s, or you can name them like stud, for example. So you know that these are studs. So this is just kind of like an organization thing. Now, my module wouldn't be complete without a panel, right? So walls have a frame, but they also have panels. So now I need to make a panel. So I'm going to take this box once again, and I'm going to turn this into something that looks like a sheet of plywood. So a sheet of plywood is typically 48 inches wide, 96 inches high, and let's say 1/2 inch thick. Okay, and once again, I'm going to place it on 24 and 48, so it's centered on my module. Now, you can see it's on the bottom, right? But I don't know if you can see here. Oh, you can see here. See this line right here? This means that the panel is actually at the same level as the frame, but I want the frame above the panel. Okay, so now it's where groups come in handy. I'm going to take all of these boards. So I selected all of them. Let's see if I can show you here. So see, all the boards are selected, but the panel is not. And I'm going to group them. Okay, and now I'm going to say that I want this to be at an elevation of 0.5. Now you see the panel is below the frame, which is where I wanted it. And I'm going to call this plywood. Okay, and now I'm going to copy this one to make a second one for the top, right? So here's my copy. Here's the second one. But I actually want this to be on top. So once again, first I'm going to place it on the X24, Y48, and an elevation of 6. And how did I get to 6? I got to 6 because here, I know that this is 1/2 inch and this is 5.5. So 6 is the elevation necessary for this panel. Now let's make it look a little bit more like plywood, and I'm going to use birch because it kind of looks like it a little bit, so you can see. And now this, basically we took a box and we made a wall module out of it. Okay. Now when you're when you're looking at this, so you're analyzing, you're either teaching someone or you're doing an instructional, or you're just basically trying to figure out like how your module works. Now this is really important here. This information shows you what, so I'm going to ungroup this. You can ungroup it. Okay, so these are my studs. It tells you the width, the depth, and the height of each one of yours. So this is selected this stud right here. And it also gives you the visible. So the visible, see, before, like I closed my box, now I can't see the interior anymore, and I want to make some changes to it or just check something. I can just turn it off like you would in GIMP or Inkscape, as Marcin said. So I can turn off layers on and off, and this is very, very useful, especially if you're preparing an instructional and you need to show all the stages of how it was built, right? So I could tell someone, okay, you start with one stud, then you add another one here, then you add another one, then you add a top plate, then you add a bottom plate, and then you add the bottom sheeting, and then you add the top sheeting. Okay, so this is really useful. All right, so now I have a module. What do I do with it? Okay, now one thing I could do is I could just select all of these and group them and call this wall module, right? And then I'm going to create another Sweet Home 3D file, say new. Okay, so I have a second one here, and I can just take my wall module from here,
copy it on, okay, copy it onto this one. And boom, there it is, right? And then say I want another one, I'm gonna just copy this one and make a copy, and I can have a bunch of walls and all of that. Now, this has a couple issues working this way. One is like when you're building a house, you're gonna have a lot of these, and each one of them has a lot of files. So it gets really heavy. And the other one is a limitation of Sweet Home 3D that hopefully will change in the future, which is it does not do a z-axis rotation, meaning if I wanted to rotate this so that my walls are vertical instead of laying on the floor, I can't do it in Sweet Home 3D. Not here, not this way. Okay, so I'm going to show what I normally do. I'm going to close this file. Okay, do not save. I don't care about saving it. And I'm going to show you what I do once I design a module. And once I design a module, I'm going to, first of all, select all the components. Okay. Now, say you don't, okay, I'm going to group this again. Say you only want to, there's one part that is extra that you don't want, like you don't want this one. Then you turn it off, and when you select it here, only the visible ones are selected. Okay. In this case, I do want all of them. So I'm just going to select. And then I'm going to go to 3D view, export to OBJ format. And what this is going to do is it's going to generate a new file, a file that is a dumb object. It's not editable anymore. It's just, all you're going to see is the exterior. It's going to be the same as, remember that chair that we saw earlier? Or, I don't know, let me grab another one from here. Okay, we got an Apple iPod. No, that's too small. It's just a single object. Let me find one, a crate. Okay, so we have a crate here. See, this crate appears here. There's no layers to it. It's a single object. I can't see what's inside. But this is advantageous when once you have your module, you may not want to see inside it anymore. You just want to use it to design a house. Okay, so that's what I'm going to do with this module right here. I'm going to export it to OBJ format, and I'm going to pick a place to save it on, and I'm just going to save it on this folder, and I'm going to call it wall module. Okay. Actually, let me do new folder tutorial so it doesn't get too confusing. I'm going to call it wall module, and now this is very important. You have to do export selection instead of export all. And the reason is if you do export all, the ground itself, the ground plane of your file is going to be exported along with the module. So you're going to have an extra layer there that you don't want. So do export selection. Okay. So now, I have a new file. Let's find that file. Come on. Can do it. That file, I put it in this folder called tutorial. Right. Now I exported one file, but I actually have 5 here, right? So the OBJ module, the OBJ file that you see here is the one that you care about. This is the one that contains all the information necessary. What the other ones are texture information. Remember? So MTL basically is a map of textures. It tells the OBJ how to apply the textures to the object. And then these are, image, just basically images, are the textures themselves that the MTL applies to the OBJ. So you do want to keep all of these files, the image files, PNG or JPEG, and the MTL files in the same level as the object, but you're not going to care about them anymore, because now what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a new file, just so we don't get confused, a new Sweet Home 3D file. Here we are. And I am going to import that object. And I do that by going to furniture. And keep in mind that all objects in Sweet Home 3D are called furniture, whether or not they're furniture. And that's just because the application was designed for interior design. So I'm going to select import furniture. Okay. So that's going to open a panel. Sometimes it takes a little bit. And I'm going to do choose model. And my model is actually on this folder. So I'm just navigating to the folder where I placed. And you can see that all the other files are grayed out. You can only import OBJ. So I'm going to say, okay, this is the file that I want, open it.
So here it is, okay? Okay, that's good. That's a file I want. So you can change the model if you imported the wrong one. Continue. So now the next step here is Sweet Home 3D allows you to rotate the object to the position that you want it to. So it shows you the perspective, it shows you the top view, left view, and front view, and then you can use these arrows to change it. So I can rotate my object like that, okay? I can rotate it like that. Now, this is exactly what I want. I want my wall to be vertical. So when I look at it from the front, it looks vertical. So this is what I want. And I'm going to, I'm good. So I'm going to say, yeah, this is what I want. Moving on to the next one. And now it shows me what it's going to look like. You can change the name and you can tell it which category to assign it to. Okay. Now, actually, I failed to do something important, so I'm going to stop this and go back. When you import an object, I'm going to go here. When you import an object, you can select, you can, if you have this one selected, if you have the library pane selected, it's going to import the object into the library. If you have the canvas selected or the plan selected, it's going to import it only into the plan and not into the library, meaning it's not going to be permanently associated with your library. Okay, so that's what I'm going to do right now. I'm just going to go to furniture, import furniture. Sometimes it takes a little bit to open up. Select my wall module, continue, put it in the position that I want, continue. And now see the category is grayed out because I'm no longer importing it into the library. You can change these parameters here if you want, or you can just import it and do it later if you want, okay? So yeah, here it is, finished, ta-da, here it is, okay? So I'm once again going to change my 3D view just because it's hard to see with the default colors, and just so you can see it. Okay, so now we have a wall here. And as you can see, I can no longer remove the layers of this wall. They're no longer visible. They're just an object, right? So now we're going to start to design our house. So I started with a wall, and by default, it actually placed it on the 0, 0 point. So it's already where I need it to be. Okay. Now, let me just see that I'm not missing anything. I just want to check my cheat sheet here. Okay, so we covered that. All right, rotations. Okay. Now, so say I have, so now I have my object here. Now I'm going to show you how hopefully you downloaded the OBI library from the website. And let me just check, are there any questions? Please save the wall panel download for people to play with. Yes, okay. Yeah, I mean, all of this can be downloaded from our website right now. Okay. Now, let's say that you already have a library, and I'll show you, the very last thing I'm going to show you is how to make a library, because that means going outside of Sweet Home 3D and using a different application. But we already provided you with the library, and you don't want to import just one module. You want to import the whole library. So you can do that in two ways. One is so I have my libraries here. And I'm just going to double click on this one library here, and Sweet Home 3D recognizes it. So I just double clicked it on my, Finder window, and it says, you already have this library. Do you want to replace it? And I'm going to say, yeah, sure, I want to replace it. And it's okay. And now if I look at this list, here's the library I just imported. So it's as simple as that. Or you can do it directly from Sweet Home 3D, and you go to Furniture, Import Furniture Library. You select which one you want. I'm selecting this one. Of course, I already have it, so it's asking me if I want to replace it, but you wouldn't get this the first time you install it. Replace, boom, library now exists here, and it contains all of these other objects. Okay, and I can just once again drag them all onto stage, whatever, this just happens to be a furniture library that I designed a while back, and you have all of these other things here. So now we have a library with which to work. So I'm just going to delete the module that I imported, and I'm going to use the OBI library to design a house. So it's called OBI structural modules. I'm assuming that you already imported it, and we're going to start designing a house right now. So the first thing is the way we name our modules for the library. So the first one tells you what kind. The first word tells you it's a wall, tells you kind of like a subfamily. It's an insulated wall. And then the third tells you the dimensions. So I know that this wall is 4 feet wide by 8 feet high by 6.5 thick. So I'm going to start with that. I'm going to drag it over here. And once again, I'm going to place it on so 3.25 on the 0 point. So I got my wall here, kind of ugly in this color. So I'm just going to make it, a nicer color, like gray, not much nicer, but you get the gist, right? Now I want to have a large window next to it. So I'm just going to drag it here. I'm going to kind of place it roughly next to this one. And then I want another window next to that because I like lots of windows. And then I want another wall here. Okay. All right. So these are not aligned at all. But how do I do it? So if I want to have a perfectly straight wall, I start by selecting the first one. So always start with the one that is already in the position that you want it. And then I select the remaining ones. And I go to here, furniture, align side by side. Okay. And now I got my first wall. We're gonna design a very simple structure, just a small one. Okay. So I'm gonna group this just for housekeeping purposes, and I'm gonna call this north wall, right? And I'm gonna tell it to make all of them blue, so they look a little bit nicer. Well, blue you can barely see. I'm gonna do unchanged. Okay. So I got my wall right here. Now I need to do a side wall. So I can, for example, I'm going to take another wall module to do the side wall, and I'm going to rotate it because I want it to be here. Okay, so now you see, like when I use it like this, it kind of like snaps to the other one. So it's fine there, but I need to align it on the left side. So I'm going to start by selecting the one that is in position, or even the whole group, and then selecting this one and do a line on left, and boom, now it's perfectly aligned. Okay. Now I'm going to do the same thing and just add a few more modules to this wall. And I'm not giving it much thought. I'm just kind of like getting there. And I'm going to do the same thing. Select the one that is in position and then all the other ones.
Are these modules, sorry, are these modules notched?
Sorry, the microphone. The modules are not notched. So that has more to do with the design of the module itself. We covered that a little bit on the previous webinar, which we will make available. But what we do, well, I guess they are notched in a way. They are interlocking, some of them. Now, on this, what we're doing right now is conceptual design. So we're not really thinking much about how the modules are fastened together in reality. We're just using boxes to do the conceptual design. And then I'll show you a little bit later on how to do a more technical design. But I will.
Do you have the technical modules also available, or just the conceptual ones?
Well, so the technical modules, they're not publicly available yet because I'm still scratching my head on how to do that in a way that is practical for everyone else. What I did when we designed the house that we built in November is I created a special library just for that house that had all the technical modules that go into that house. And then there's another issue, which is the module designs, the ones that are offset, are very, very difficult to use in Sweet Home 3D because of the alignment issue, because of the offset. So what I did was I faked it and I kept two families of modules, ones that were technically correct and another ones that I used just for the design in Sweet Home 3D. So that's the kind of thing that I haven't quite worked out how to do to make that available. But I can show you a little bit later on what is the difference between them and why is it problematic.
And the technically correct ones were used for the instructionals, right?
No, but both of them. Well, see, the ones that are not technical, it's kind of okay. Let me show you then if you want to see. I will show, let me open one of those modules and show you what I mean, because that's the easiest way. So we go here, library, structural modules. That's not it. I have many libraries, too many. Okay. All right. So I'm going to open let me open a wall. I'm going to open this wall. Okay.
Just by the way, I asked that question for everybody's references. There's a very big difference between just a concept drawing, like what Katarina's doing, and something that's technically correct, because when you go out there into the field and you build a house, every little tiny detail and notch and spacing has to be correct. So that's very important.
Right, and I'll show you how I do that. So I usually, actually, I should have started by explaining this. I'm sorry that I missed it, which is the first thing I do, at least, and I think that that's what everyone does, is a conceptual design, which is kind of like the overall shape of the house, just kind of get like a feeling for it, right? Then once I'm happy, but of course the overall shape of the house already implies that you have some technical knowledge. You know that what you're designing is buildable. And we did cover that on the previous webinar. So when I'm doing it, I already know that I can't have a roof span of 40 feet because that's just going to be really, really hard to build. But at that point, I'm not really worried about how, this board is 1 inch off or something. But then once I get to that design, then we start the technical design. And that's where every ½ inch or quarter inch is going to matter, because it could be a big nightmare if you're off by even a quarter inch. So I'll mention that a little bit. Okay, so this is one of the modules. I'm going to remove the panel so you can see the inside. And this is what our modules that we used recently look like. So you have a top plate, a bottom plate, a stud in the middle, 24 inches on center, and then you have another stuff that is offset. Like you can see here that this stud sticks out 3/4 inch. And the reason is because then when I have a second module that looks exactly like this one here on the left, then they're going to interlock, they're going to fit, right? So I'm just basically kind of like the Lego principle. So I guess notched in some way, I would say. Now, the problem is if I take this module, I'm going to import, I'm going to just import the, no, actually, I'm not going to import. So now if you look here, I have one folder that says technical, and that contains this design, and I have another folder that says design, right? And this is the technically correct. Now, if I switch to the design, what you're going to see here is that instead of it sticking out, I have just a 3/4 inch here and 3/4 inch here. And the reason, okay, let me try this again. So I'm going to make a copy. I'm going to turn off the technical, go back to the technical. I'm going to make a copy of the technical, okay? All right, so now I have two side by side. Now I go to Sweet Home 3D, I select it like I showed you, and I do furniture align side by side. What happens is I end up with a gap here because Sweet Home 3D knows that my module ends here, and therefore it's not going to know that it needs to interlock. Now you could get into the numbers and tell this one and move this one right here. You could move it a 1/4 inch to the left. But once you have dozens of these, it's really, really hard to do, right? It's much easier to do a line side by side, and then the math just gets crazy and you spend hours on it. So then what I did was I created a design one, and the design one is just fake, but it's real. Okay, so how do I explain this? So I'm going to make a copy of the design one and put it next to this one, and I'll do, once again, selected furniture aligned side by side, and boom. Originally, this one was only a 3/4 inch, but once I put another one next to it that also has 3/4 inch, then I get something that looks the way it needs to look, right? So I get my ½ inch here. Yeah, does that explain it, why it's fake? Yeah. Okay, all right.
What do you do on the end where it's fake? To make it real, if there's not the same one coming to it.
Well, then that's where we need a lot of files, and that's one of the challenges that we've run into with the interlocking modules, that they're asymmetrical, which creates challenges not only in terms of the design, in making the design easier, but it also creates challenges in terms of building it, because suddenly your module has a side, right? It has a left side and a top and a bottom and a right side. So that's why I said like I haven't made the technical library design available, because I haven't quite worked out how to make this less confusing. So yeah, input or suggestions are very welcome.
But the idea is still that with the so-called conceptual modules, they represent the reality, right?
Exactly. Yes. So
you can you can design with them.
You can, absolutely. Yeah. Once you put them together, they represent the reality. And I'll show you that later. Yeah. So, I mean, I showed you here. Actually, I think that this one might not even be technically correct, because this looks thinner than it needs to be. But trust me, that's what it's supposed to look like. Right. Okay. All right. So now back to the conceptual design. So I'm going to get my wall. So I created a second wall here. I'm once again going to group it and call it east wall. And now I'm just going to be lazy and copy this wall and make the west wall. And I'm going to do the same. So I'll select the north first, then the west, and then the furniture align on the right. And actually, I need this to be here first. So do this again, furniture align on the right. And boom, it's in place. I'm going to rename it west wall. I'm going to copy my north wall and put it here and do it once again, furniture align on left, and boom. Okay, so I designed this really quickly. And that's why I love the library, is because now, I mean, of course, I'm missing a door here. You know, houses usually have doors, but that's fine. Okay, now the next step is to put a second story on it. So I'm gonna just actually use a roof module, a flat roof module that is 4 by, I need it to be longer, 4 by 6.5, and I'm gonna have to change the dimensions of this a little bit to 2, 3. Okay, so now I have, oh, here it is. You guys can see it, right? So it's just sitting on the ground there. So I'm gonna have to once again position it. So I'm gonna put it at 24 inches, and then at 101.5, which is half of this. And now I want it to sit on top of the walls, not on the floor, right? So I know that my walls are 96 inches tall, so I'm going to tell it to go to 96 inches. And I'm going to change the color just so you can see it better. And actually, this actually needs to be 1 inch, now 205, and this needs to be 2. Okay, so now I got my floor, but I need more modules, so I'm just going to copy this one, put it next to this one. And I'm not going to care about aligning it. I'm just kind of throwing them in there. Yeah. Now, again, I select the one that are already aligned, select all the other ones, furniture aligned side by side. Okay. So now I got my, and I'm going to once again group this and call it floor. So this is just the first story. Now I'm just going to do really quickly a second story. So I'm going to drag on this other module that is just like a little wall. It's a short wall. And I want it to be, once again, on the 0 point. So 24, 3.5. And I want the elevation of this one to be the height of the wall plus the thickness of my floor. Now, the thickness of my floor, I forgot to check. I can see here is 6.5, so I need to do 6.5, 102.5. Okay, and there it is. So I'm going to do, actually, I want this one. This is the low one, so I want it on the front. So I'm going to just kind of put it here, right? And okay, I'm going to make copies of it to make the rest of the wall. Okay, so I'm going to align all of these, align side by side. Boom, I got my front wall. Now I want my back wall to be tall because I'm going to put I'm going to do a roof. Okay. So I'm going to do 24, 3.25, and the height of this one, what did I say was? 102.5. There it is. So again, I'm going to make another wall, the wall, align all of them. Okay. All right, so now I need my roof. This is going to provide me with my roof slope, right? So I have a tall wall and a short wall. Now I got to get a roof on it. Now, this is where the challenge with Sweet Home 3D comes in, which is normally I would just put a roof module here and I would rotate it on the Z-axis until Donald's the most complicated webinars. And rotate it until it gave me the angle that I needed, right? Now, unfortunately, I can't do that in Sweet Home 3D. I have to do that in Blender. Now, it's already 5 p.m. and we're still a little bit... Marcin, should I show the Blender, include Blender? What's your opinion? Yeah, include Blender. Okay, so now what I'm going to do is I'm going to go into Blender. And Blender is quite tricky. So first thing I'm going to do is delete this object here. This is Blender. And I try to press as few buttons as possible because if you press the wrong button, you get lost in Blender. And I'm going to import an OBJ. Okay, so I already have a box that I designed. And I'm going to go look for my modules, libraries, objects. And I am going to select structural modules, and I'm going to select roof, a flat roof module. Here we go, the one that we were using before. 4 by 16. Okay, so I'm going to select this one and I'm going to do import object. Okay, now where's my object? Why isn't it here? View. Okay, here we go. Right, so I just, here's my box. Okay, now, oh, what I imported was actually a greenhouse. So let me do that again. Sorry, import. Okay, here's my module. So what I did is I did view left, right? So I'm looking at it from the left angle. Now I'm going to do rotate, and I'm going to rotate this roof in whatever direction I need it to go. Okay, and you can enter the exact angle here. But of course, you got to know what the angle of your rotation is, and you do that by using a rafter angle calculator. So the rafter angle calculator works in the following way. So I'm just going to bookmark manager. I'm going to open my tools here and go to tools and roof pitch calculator. So you can just find it online. This is just someone's roof pitch. I know that the rise, which is the difference between my little wall and my top wall, is 48 inches, and that the run, meaning the space between the walls, is 16 feet. So that's 192. Calculate, and so this tells me that my angle is 14 degrees. Okay, so that's what I'm going to do here on Blender. I'm going to tell it to go to 14 degrees and there. Now I'm going to re-export it as OBJ, and I'm just going to put it on my desktop to save time, and well, I'll just leave it called untitled. Okay, so I exported my object. Now going back to Sweet Home 3D, I'm going to select this plan right here and do furniture, import furniture. So I'm going to import this object. Go to my desktop, and I called it untitled, right? Select untitled object. Hopefully this kind of worked. All right. Yep, that looks about right. Continue.
And the properly angled modules are already in the library, right? For everybody
Well,
else, right?
I mean, okay, so here it is. See, okay, now I have the angle. Well, the ones in the current library only account for a rise of 2 feet, 1 foot and 2 feet. So I will have to include modules that account for different rises. So this one happens to be 4 feet. Okay. But I kept it this way because I wanted to show you, actually I talked to Emmanuel who developed Sweet Home 3D, and hopefully we will be able to get rotation directly in the program so we won't have to go through all of these hoops. Okay, so now I'm going to place this on top, and I got to once again figure out what's the height of my wall. Now, the one I want right here is the lowest one. So I'm going to add up. I know that the bottom wall is 96, and then I have a floor that is 6.5, and then I have another 48 inches. So that tells me the height that I need to place this at, which is around about 150.5 at 24 and at 96. Okay, well, came a little short. Oh, right, because I imported one that wasn't long enough. So I'm just gonna fake it and call it 216. And there's my roof module. Okay. Now you can fiddle with it or get the rotation. So now I can make copies and so forth. And so forth, and basically repeat the same thing once again, line side by side. Yeah. Okay. So now we have our basic house shape. Now I'll probably want this to be longer, so it does have somewhat of an overhang, right? I should have done this before. Okay. So now this is the conceptual design, and then you can, put some windows and doors and things like that. I'm not going to get into the rake walls because those are a little bit more complicated. But basically, you got your basic house shape. Yeah. Now, since we're running out of time, I just want to show you. So let's say I'm happy with this. It's not technically accurate, but it's kind of the shape of the house that I want. So now I have to move on to the technical drawings. And at that point, what I often do, I'm not even going to get into the foundation at this point, is I go back to my modules. And remember, we had these modules that we designed. That's not the one. Sorry about that. Okay, so we have these modules that we designed. Originally, I exported them with the sheeting, right, with the panels, but I can also export just the frame. So that's what I did. I exported just the frames. And then I designed the whole house with just the frames. And the reason is because, so this way I can see exactly what Marcin was saying, right? So I look at this and I can see that my stud is perfectly aligned with the floor joists, that everything actually fits. So this is the next step that I do, is do a model of the house that is only the framing. Okay. Now you can also use Sweet Home 3D to design your foundation. That's what I did here. So I use that, remember that gray box? I use it to create the shape of the concrete and then the forms that go around it. So you can see all the forms are here. So I basically base all my bill of materials and calculations and all the designs on knowing that these forms actually fit. So this is a really good test. Then I added the sill plate. So the sill plate is also like this, already has all the calculations I need. And then for good measure, I added some fake walls just to make sure that they actually fit it. So then I'm looking at all of these details and getting all of these measurements. So this is very important simulation. Before we build the foundation, we got to make sure that it really fits, that it really matches. So I spent several days just on this one alone, even though it looks really simple. And then, you keep going up. You can add your walls here, and then this is where the 3D view virtual visit becomes really important, because it allows me to really look, is this in the right place? Look, okay, my floor is not in the right place. It needs to be higher up. Okay, well, now it's too high, but you get the gist. So now I can see all the details, where all the studs are, everything. I don't know, I mean, it might be a little bit too much already. Should I still show you how to create a library? Oh, SketchUp Pro, is there interoperability, including FreeCAD? Marcin, you're the expert in SketchUp.
so that
I think your audio is off. Is your audio on?
I don't believe that interoperability is really robust. I mean, SketchUp uses its own format, so we're kind of disusing it because we're going into the full open source tool chains from Sweet Home to Blender to FreeCAD, and the architecture workbench in FreeCAD already exists. So that's why we're doing that.
Mm-hmm. Okay, well, just for good measure, I'll show you really quickly how to. I mean, it's like any CAD program. It takes a few hours to really feel comfortable with it and to figure out what's the workflow that really works for you. The technical design is particularly challenging as it is in any platform. But I will just give you one last piece of information before we move on to questions, or we continue with questions, and I'll just show you really quickly. Okay, so there's another piece of software on the Sweet Home 3D website, and it's called the Furniture Library Editor. And I'm just going to open it up. Remember, I designed that module, and then I created an OBJ out of it, right? Now, I can actually take a bunch of modules that I created that way and create a library with it. And I use it using this piece of software called the Furniture Library Editor Bootstrap, which is basically just a Java applet. So the thing I'm going to do is I want a new library. So I created a new library. And then I have some modules that are already designed and converted into objects here. So I'm just going to I don't know, just grab something. Oh, here's one object. Okay, so I'm just dragging it onto this application, and it takes a little bit, and here it comes, and it's importing it, and boom, there it is. Now I can double click it, and I can manipulate it right here. Okay, so I'm manipulating this shape. I want it to be like this. You give it a name, right? Whatever, wall insulated. It's 1 by 8 by 4.5, so it's kind of a weird wall module. But then here's very important. I'm going to define a category, and I'm going to say that I want this to be the OBI test library. Okay, so I created it, and now I'm going to get another wall, another module just to add for good measure. Could be this one. Okay, so I imported another one. Once again, can rename it, and I'm going to tell it that it goes into the OBI test library. Okay, so there it is. Now I save my library. All right, so I'm going to save it on the desktop and call it OBI test. Okay, so that's it. Now I go back to Sweet Home 3D anywhere, and I'm going to do furniture import no, sorry. It's a bit late in the day. Furniture import furniture library, and where's the library I just created? I called it OBI test. Here it is. I just created this file, and I open it, and it tells me it was successfully imported, right? So now I go here. Oh, and here's OBI test library. And here are the modules I just created. I just added to this library. So basically what we're doing is we're using this other applet just basically to bundle a bunch of objects so they're easier to use in Sweet Home 3D. Though obviously you can import objects one by one as well if that's more practical for you. Okay, ability to create rendering in 2D drawings from open source design software. Rendering. Can you explain? Could you elaborate a little bit?
That's a question can wait for another time.
Okay.
Just I thought of it at this moment and needed to type it out so I wouldn't forget it.
Okay.
There's a clear answer to that. One, there's rendering, basic rendering within Sweet Home, and then to get really high quality renderings, you can export into Blender, and you can actually look up on the OSE wiki. The architecture tutorial shows some examples. It's really stunning. You can do really well on that. 2D floor plans come out of FreeCAD. And Katerina, can you say how you do floor plans out of this?
Okay, so now here I want a floor plan out of this. So
I'm just going to go to Plan here and export to SVG format, which is compatible with Inkscape. And you can name it whatever. So I'm just going to export it as framing, which is the name of this thing. And then I'm going to open framing in Inkscape, and you can see the floor plan. I guess my Inkscape is a little slow. And okay, so this is just basically showing me what was already there. So it's showing me this is not a good example actually, because this is a better example. Okay, so I'm going to export this one, plan, export, but it basically generates a floor plan just like any other. Okay, so foundation, let's open this one. And here it is. Okay, so see, this is a pretty standard floor plan. And it shows all of my measurements as well. Okay, too many windows open. All right, so Inkscape is not collaborating either, but you get the gist. It shows me all of the measurements. So this is really great for taking out on the field. So you have all of your notes here.
How do you get like door and window symbols and other things in there? I saw that in Sweet Home.
Oh, okay. We do have it too, but that's actually generated when you create the library. Okay, so basically, remember this. These are the symbols that appear. It's whatever your module looks like. This is generated automatically. No, I don't think you can. It's basically a rep. Actually, I struggle with that because originally I wanted to make the walls white, but then white on white just wasn't visible. That's why I ended up making them all black. But I don't think you can change the icon per se at this point, not using any of the software that I have at least.
Yeah, so to summarize, I think we're finding out that the best way to use this, if you want to do a realistic design, is download the library of OBI modules, the non-technically correct ones, the conceptual ones. You can design, and what do you do from there?
Okay, so well, it depends on your level of what we're going to be able to provide. I got to figure out the technical library issue, but what you can do is you can use our library to use that to do the conceptual design and to really get comfortable with the software, and most of all to learn how to design houses. That's the most important part. It's not just the software; it's like what makes sense, right? So that's where that's why I wanted to hold this webinar on the same day as the previous one, because they really go together. And then at that point, there's two options. Either we found a way to make a technical library available, which I really want to do, and you can use that, or imagine that doesn't work for you anyway. You know how to design the modules. So you do what I just showed you in the beginning of this webinar, and you design your own technical modules, and then you design the house with that. So none of this is prohibitive or extremely difficult. I think that the challenging part really is, once you get your hands on the software, this is so much easier than SketchUp or any of the other applications I find, is going to be to know how to design a house.
Okay.
And math too. I mean, to design a house, you got to like math. There's just no way around it. There's a lot of math anywhere you turn.
Okay, so how about this suggestion? Okay, suggestion here. Why not make the technical modules identical to the modules that we built in real life, and then just work that in Sweet Home to put them together? I mean, you're saying just the challenge is the alignment issue, that's all?
Yeah, but the alignment issue becomes a major headache, because I did try to design with them as they were, and at one point I was just ready to throw the computer out the window. Because alignment, 90% of what you're going to be doing in Sweet Home 3D is alignment and positioning, because that's what you're doing when a technical design is making sure everything fits.
Okay, but then if you are skilled, because now we built the house and we're pretty familiar with how everything goes together, so right now, can't we just take the modules and pretty much when we know how they go together, do it right the first time, and therefore it becomes tractable?
I'm not sure what you mean by doing it right.
Well, what I'm saying is that once somebody has the experience of, say, just experiencing how the modules are built in real life, which you can do in a workshop or just prototyping it yourself, then when you actually go to building the model, say a complicated model in Sweet Home, you make one module fit against the other. Okay, good. You know that's correct, and you just move to the next one. I think the trouble comes when you have to make all the corrections because you didn't get it right in the first place.
Right, but no, but I mean, but the every house is different, so we're not going to build the same house twice. I could do it for one module, one house, but every house is different. So assuming that if you got the first module right, everything is going to fall into place, it's just not a very good approach. The goal of doing technical prototyping in CAD is that you can test every single assumption. And trust me when I say that those kinds of assumptions tend to backfire. Like I made a few like this, oh, if this fits, everything else is going to fit. And it turns out I was wrong. So the purpose is CAD is cheap. Software is cheap, right? You don't want to just get lazy in CAD, not do the due diligence and then run into reality. So,
okay, so you're, to conclude then, you're saying that you can do it technically correct in Sweet Home, but it just still, that's a long process. It takes a bit of time.
No, it's not. Well, it does take time. Everything takes time in any CAD, in any software, in any application, right? So the time is more into the figuring out where things go. The challenge with doing it in Sweet Home 3 is that you need two kinds of files: one that are technically correct, and others that are technically correct only once assembled.
I see. So the best approach we figured out.
This is confusing. That's the only. It's both of them are technically correct. It's just that it becomes confusing. That's the only thing for people. It's all confusing to me because I'm very familiar with it, but it might be confusing for others. Okay. Blake has a question. He's asking, are Inkscape and Blender available for Windows? I'm pretty sure they are. Yeah, absolutely. Yes. Yes. They're pretty good. At releasing several versions or for different platforms. So we ran a little kind of late. Any more questions? I mean, I'm sure there's a lot of questions, and this is just supposed to be a little bit of an intro, but both of these topics are a little complex. So hopefully what we'll do in the future is like we'll hold more maybe work groups or more webinars where we all work together, and instead of me just trying to dump a lot of information. I mean, you still need to have this introductory, but then maybe we'll just do work groups where we just try and do something together one day.
Yeah. Okay. I think this was great. A total introduction to the thing, but you can definitely rewatch the video and understand the whole process, and you basically have to get your hands on practicing with the modules. So yeah, thank you very much. Great.
Okay. No more questions? Okay, all right. So let's call it a day. Thank you so much for bearing with us. Donald went through his cognitive overload. We are too sometimes, most days. So I totally relate. And well, we'll see you next week.